When we talk about protecting our Iman in this age, the very first step is simply recognizing the kind of world we are living in. Because spiritual problems cannot be solved until they are first correctly diagnosed. And today, we live in a world unlike any other in human history. An environment that is not neutral, not passive, and certainly not spiritually gentle. It is a world engineered to consume attention, fragment focus, overstimulate desire, and exhaust emotional energy. If a believer does not consciously understand this environment, they will unconsciously absorb its effects. And what disappears quietly, almost without you noticing, is the sensitivity of the heart. The heart becomes numb, heavy, distracted. And once the heart is distracted, Iman becomes fragile. People often imagine that losing faith is sudden, dramatic, catastrophic. But in reality, faith usually doesn't collapse. It erodes. The erosion begins so subtly that a person might not even recognize it until the symptoms become undeniable. The Qur'an warns us about ghafla, heedlessness, not because people openly reject Allah, but because they slowly forget Him, gradually replacing remembrance with noise, reflection with scrolling, presence with endless stimulation. The modern world is designed in a way that if you are not intentionally protecting your heart, you are unintentionally weakening it. Think about how human attention has become the most valuable currency. Corporations fight for it. Social media platforms are engineered to keep you hooked. Notifications are designed to interrupt your thoughts, to break your concentration, to pull you from one impulse to the next. These distractions are not harmless entertainment. They shape habits, reduce mental clarity, and weaken emotional control. And when the mind becomes scattered, the heart follows. You cannot maintain spiritual depth in an environment where you are constantly pulled to the surface. And what is even more concerning is that this erosion often happens under the disguise of normal life. You're not doing something haram, you're not committing some major sin, but you're constantly distracted, constantly stimulated, constantly consuming. Your brain is rarely still, your heart is rarely quiet. And this constant noise creates a thick layer around the heart, a layer that prevents you from feeling the sweetness of worship, the peace of Purification, or the comfort of Qur'an. This is why many people today say, I pray, but I don't feel anything. Or I make Purification, but my heart feels empty. The problem is not the prayer or the Purification. The problem is the environment that numbs you long before you even stand before Allah. We have to understand that every era had its fitna, but today's fitna is unique because it is continuous. Earlier generations faced spiritual challenges, but those challenges were external, occasional, episodic. Today's challenges are internal, constant, unrelenting. A person carries their distraction in their pocket. A person carries temptation in their pocket. A person carries comparison, envy, pressure, anxiety, and noise, all compressed into one glowing screen. And the tragedy is that we have normalized this. We do not realize that the very device meant to connect us often disconnects us from the one connection that matters most. And let's be intellectually honest, every distraction has a psychological cost. When your brain is constantly switching from one piece of content to another, you lose the ability to focus. And the loss of focus is not merely a mental issue. It is a spiritual issue. Salah requires focus. Qur'an contemplation requires focus. Dhikr requires presence. Reflection requires stillness. If the mind loses the ability to stay with one thought, the heart loses the ability to stay with one purpose. And this is why many people feel spiritually drained even though they haven't sinned. They feel distant from Allah even though they still believe in Him. Their faith is there, but it is buried under layers of digital debris. Every time the heart tries to rise, another notification pulls it down. Another distraction steals its energy. Another moment of comparison crushes its contentment. Bit by bit, the heart forgets how to breathe. So the first step in protecting Iman is simply acknowledging this reality without sugarcoating it. A believer must understand that they are living in a spiritually aggressive era. An era where the default setting is distraction, and distraction is the enemy of faith. Because faith requires intentionality, a distracted person cannot be intentional. And this is exactly how Iman weakens, not through wrongdoing, but through passiveness. And notice something profound. Almost every act of worship in Islam trains you to fight distraction. Salah pulls you away from the world 5 times a day. Dhikr forces your tongue to slow down and your heart to wake up. Fasting teaches discipline in an age of impulsiveness. Qur'an recitation brings stillness in an age of constant movement. Even the Prophet they often retreated to solitude to reconnect with Allah. Why? Because distraction has always been spiritually dangerous. But today, distraction is not just present. It is industrialized, it is marketed, it is monetized, it is more persistent than ever before. So the believer must become aware of this world, not to fear it, but to navigate it consciously. When you recognize the forces trying to occupy your mind, you become more protective of your focus. When you understand how easily Iman can erode, you begin guarding your heart like something precious. When you realize that the world is constantly trying to pull you outward, you intentionally pull yourself inward. And that inner awareness is the beginning of spiritual strength. Because once you see the challenge clearly, you can respond to it wisely. You'll think twice before endless scrolling. You'll pause before consuming random content. You'll notice when your heart is becoming noisy and seek moments of silence. You'll understand that protecting your Iman in this era is not about doing more. It's about being more intentional, more aware, more present. The modern world has mastered the art of keeping you distracted. But Allah has given you the tools to rise above it. The question is whether you recognize the environment enough to use those tools consciously. Protecting your faith begins long before prayer, long before BFA Macron. It begins with the awareness that your heart is under constant attack. And that awareness should awaken something inside you. A sense of responsibility, a sense of urgency, a sense of dignity. You are not meant to live as a slave to noise. You are not meant to be pulled in every direction. You are meant to have a heart anchored in Allah, even when surrounded by chaos. The first step is recognizing the battlefield, because you cannot protect what you do not recognize is under threat. And the believer who understands this will live differently, choose differently, and eventually feel differently. When we speak about protecting our Iman, one of the most essential elements is developing a conscious awareness of the heart. Because in our tradition, the heart is not simply an emotional organ, it's the center of spiritual perception, the vessel through which divine guidance is received, and the mirror that reflects your relationship with Allah. When the heart is awake, sensitive, and aware, Iman becomes vibrant. But when the heart is numb, distracted, or spiritually suffocated, even basic acts of worship feel heavy, distant, or routine. So, the real question becomes, how do we cultivate that inner awareness in a world that constantly pulls us outward? The first thing to understand is that the heart has states. It fluctuates. It feels, it absorbs, it reacts. The Qur'an often describes the heart becoming hard, veiled, rusty, or sealed, not because a person committed some massive sin, but because the person stopped paying attention to their inner world. When the heart is left unattended, it begins to reflect whatever environment it lives in. And if the environment is filled with distraction, noise, comparison, temptation, and overstimulation, then the heart will inevitably absorb that. That's why the early scholars would say, the heart is like a window. Whatever you place it in front of, that is what it will display. But awareness of the heart, what we call muraqabah, is not something that suddenly appears. It is cultivated through intentional stillness. You have to learn to pause long enough to notice the state of your inner self. Many people today don't actually know what their heart feels like because they never allow it a moment of quiet. Their minds are always occupied, their attention always captured, their emotions always scattered. And when the inner world is drowned in noise, the heart loses its ability to speak. So the first layer of awareness is simply learning to check in with yourself. Ask questions that most people never ask. What is the state of my heart right now? Am I spiritually awake or drifting? Do I feel connected to Allah or distant? When was the last time I felt genuine? KHUSHU, Macron letter 2, BF in prayer. When was the last time the Qur'an truly moved me? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Because nothing changes until something is first acknowledged. And this is where psychological depth becomes important. A distracted heart doesn't just lose spiritual focus. It loses emotional clarity. When you live without inner awareness, your desires become louder than your principles, your impulses override your wisdom, and your emotions start controlling your decisions. The Prophet ﷺ warned us that inside the body is a small piece of flesh. If it is sound, everything becomes sound, and if it is corrupted, everything becomes corrupted. That is the heart. The state of your heart determines the state of your life. But here's the challenge. The world today pushes people to live outwardly. Your value is measured by what you produce, what you display, what you achieve, what you own. The entire structure of the modern lifestyle is built on constant activity, constant visibility, constant movement. And because of that, very few people turn inward. Very few examine their motivations, purify their intentions, or confront the inner unrest that comes from spiritual inconsistency. And yet, Islam is a faith that begins inwardly. The first command was Iqra, reflect, contemplate, awaken. The Prophet ﷺ spent decades nurturing his inner world before the public message even began. So cultivating awareness of the heart is not optional, it is foundational. And one of the most powerful tools for this awareness is silence. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of an intentional pause. A moment where you step back from the noise of the world and observe the condition of your soul. The early Muslims would say, if you do not give your heart a moment to breathe, it will suffocate. And many people today are spiritually suffocating without even realizing why. When you begin developing this awareness, something interesting happens. You start noticing the triggers that affect your heart. You notice how certain environments weaken you. You notice how certain conversations drain you. You notice how certain types of content darken your inner state. And you notice how certain acts like a sincere DU letter 2, BFA Macron in the last third of the night, or a quiet recitation of Qur'an suddenly lift you, soften you, and reconnect you. This awareness is what allows you to guard your Iman before it begins to slip. Because most people only react after the heart has already drifted. But a person with muraqabah reacts the moment the heart begins leaning away from Allah. They notice the early signs, the prayers becoming rushed, the Dhikr becoming mechanical, the desire for worship becoming weaker, the attraction to sin becoming stronger, the heaviness in the chest. During spiritual moments, these are signals, these are warnings, and only someone who listens to the heart will recognize them. Another element of inner awareness is emotional honesty with yourself. Many people hide from their own emotions because looking inward can be painful. But if you cannot confront the pain inside you, the wounds inside you, the doubts inside you, the insecurities inside you, how will you heal them? How will you bring them to Allah? How will you transform them into a man? The person who avoids self-awareness becomes a stranger to their own heart. And when you become a stranger to your heart, it becomes much easier to lose yourself spiritually. Awareness of the heart also brings one more gift: humility. When you see your inner fluctuations clearly, you stop judging others so quickly, because you realize how fragile faith can be. You realize how easy it is to fall, how simple it is to drift, how subtle the traps of SHOY letter 1, E6, DA Macron N can be. You begin approaching others with compassion instead of criticism, because you know the battle you are fighting within yourself every day. And humility is one of the strongest protectors of a man, but awareness alone is not enough. Awareness must lead to action. When you notice that your heart is becoming distant, you respond immediately. When you observe that your worship has lost its sweetness, you seek moments of reflection. When you feel that the world has clouded your inner clarity, you intentionally step back, because the heart, like a plant, needs consistent nurturing. It needs stillness, Dhikr, Qur'an, meaningful solitude, and moments of presence with Allah. And the beauty of this awareness is that it creates resilience. Because once you know your heart deeply, the world can no longer manipulate you easily. You become less reactive. You are less controlled by impulsiveness. You stop allowing external pressures to dictate your inner state. You begin living from the inside out rather than the outside in. And that shift, that subtle reversal, is where spiritual strength begins. In an age where most people are disconnected from themselves, a believer must be deeply connected to their inner world. Because the heart is where faith resides, the heart is where sincerity is born, the heart is where doubts are resolved, the heart is where remembrance settles, and the heart is where Allah looks not at your wealth, not at your status, not at your popularity. What matters is what lies within. Without awareness, the heart becomes a silent casualty of modern life. With awareness, it becomes the anchor that keeps you steady in a storm. And so the second step in protecting your Iman is cultivating that awareness every day in moments of quiet honesty, in sincere reflection, in conscious presence. Because the one who knows their heart will never lose their path. When we talk about structuring our daily lives around purpose rather than impulse, we're addressing something that sits at the very core of spiritual preservation. Because Iman is not something that survives on inspiration alone. It survives on structure, discipline, and intentionality. In an age where everything around us is designed to place desire before duty and entertainment before effort, the believer has to consciously reverse that order. Without structure, the heart drifts. Without discipline, clarity fades. And without purposeful routines, Iman slowly weakens, not because a person stopped believing, but because they stopped building the kind of life where belief can breathe. One of the greatest illusions of the modern world is the belief that we can live however we want and still maintain spiritual strength. But the truth is that your lifestyle is always shaping your soul. The way you spend your time is not neutral. The routines you follow, the habits you nurture, the stimuli you expose yourself to, all of it forms the spiritual ecosystem your heart lives in. And the heart, like any living thing, is influenced by its environment. If you place a delicate plant in harsh weather, it weakens. If you place the heart in a lifestyle built on chaos, distraction, inconsistency, and mindless consumption, the heart will inevitably struggle. This is why Islam emphasizes rhythm. There is a divine wisdom in having fixed prayer times, consistent remembrance, and structured acts of worship. Allah designed our day so that we are regularly pulled out of worldly activity and reoriented toward Him. That rhythm is meant to protect the heart from becoming fully absorbed by the Dunya. But the modern world disrupts this rhythm. It fills every empty moment with noise, every pause with stimulation, every silence with content. And so the believer must reclaim their time, or else the world will claim it for them. Structuring your day around purpose begins with seeing time as sacred. The Prophet letter FDA taught us that time is one of the greatest blessings, yet one of the most misused. Most people are not destroyed because they lack talent, intelligence, or knowledge. They are destroyed because they lack discipline. They do not manage their hours. They do not take control of their routines. They live reactively rather than proactively. And a heart that lives reactively is a heart that becomes vulnerable to whatever pulls strongest in the moment. The truth is, impulse is one of the greatest enemies of spiritual consistency. Impulse makes you check your phone at every vibration. Impulse leads you from one video to the next. Impulse distracts you when you should be praying. Impulse robs you of depth, replacing it with constant stimulation. And when you are ruled by impulse, you lose the ability to be ruled by purpose. But when you begin structuring your life intentionally, you reclaim agency. You decide what enters your mind. You decide who influences your heart. You decide how your attention is used. You decide which actions are prioritized. And with that agency comes clarity. And with clarity comes the strength to protect your Iman. One of the most powerful things a believer can do in this era is to create daily rituals that anchor the heart. Small, consistent practices become spiritual anchors in a world that spins rapidly. Waking up with intention, praying on time with presence, reciting even a small portion of Qur'an daily, practicing moments of quiet reflection, limiting exposure to digital noise. These are not minor habits, these are spiritual lifelines, because consistency, even in small amounts, nourishes the heart far more than occasional bursts of inspiration. Discipline is not about doing everything at once, it's about doing the right things repeatedly. The Qur'an was revealed over 23 years, teaching us that transformation happens gradually, with continuous effort. Likewise, a disciplined lifestyle nurtures the heart, slowly but steadily. But structuring your life also means setting boundaries. Without boundaries, distraction becomes limitless. Without boundaries, your phone will dominate your attention. Without boundaries, entertainment will consume your free time. Without boundaries, people will pull you into their chaos. And without boundaries, SHOY letter 1, is 6, Macron N will find endless openings. You cannot protect your Iman while living without boundaries. This means limiting the amount of content you consume, creating clear divisions between work, worship, and rest, guarding your mornings and nights, choosing intentionally when to be available and when to disconnect. Structuring your life is not about retreating from the world. It's about managing the world so it doesn't manage you. And this is where many people struggle without realizing why. They try to pray with focus, but their mind is overstimulated. They try to read Qur'an, but their attention is fragmented. They try to reflect, but their inner world is crowded. The problem isn't their spirituality. The problem is their lifestyle. A lifestyle built on distraction cannot produce a heart that is attentive. A schedule built on chaos cannot produce a soul that is calm. A mind that is constantly bombarded cannot produce a heart that is connected. So the first act of spiritual self-care is restructuring the daily pattern of your life. Make prayer the spine of your day, not something squeezed into the cracks. Make Qur'an a non-negotiable part of your morning or evening. Make solitude a protected space. Make Dhikr a natural habit rather than a rare practice. Make your phone serve you rather than enslave you. When you place your life in the correct order, Iman naturally strengthens, and you begin to notice a transformation. You stop feeling spiritually drained. Your heart becomes lighter. Your focus becomes sharper. Your emotional state stabilizes. You stop reacting to everything and start responding with intention. You begin to feel moments of genuine connection in worship. Why? Because discipline creates space for sincerity to emerge. And sincerity is the essence of Iman. Purposeful structure also means aligning your daily choices with your long-term spiritual goals. Ask yourself, what kind of believer do I want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and then ask, are my daily habits helping me reach that version of myself? If the answer is no, then something must change, because the future of your man is built by the habits of your present. A believer who structures their life around purpose becomes unshakable. They may face temptations, distractions, and challenges, but they have a system that protects their heart. They have routines that keep them grounded. They have a lifestyle that supports their faith rather than fights against it. And the beauty of this approach is that it brings peace. A structured life is a peaceful life. A scheduled life is a clear life. A disciplined life is a meaningful life, and a purposeful life is a spiritually safe life. Your man is too precious to be left at the mercy of impulse. Your heart is too valuable to be shaped by randomness. Your soul is too sacred to be managed by distraction. Structure your life with intention, and your man will naturally flourish. When we talk about protecting our Iman in this age of overwhelming distraction, one of the most essential elements is grounding the heart and mind in knowledge. Not information knowledge, not random fragments of Islamic quotes scattered across social media, but deep, structured, meaningful understanding that anchors your identity, stabilizes your world, and strengthens your connection with Allah. Because Iman is not sustained by emotion alone, it is sustained by clarity, and clarity comes from knowledge. We live in a time where doubts spread faster than truths, where every ideology is presented with confidence, where opinions are mistaken for facts, and where the loudest voice often drowns out the wisest one. In such a world, the believer who lacks knowledge will inevitably feel spiritually vulnerable. Their faith becomes reactive, not stable, emotional, not intelligent, fragile, not fortified. And this fragility does not come from a lack of sincerity. It comes from a lack of intellectual grounding. One of the most profound realities of Islam is that it never asked you to believe blindly. The Qur'an is filled with arguments, evidences, reflections, questions, and rational invitations. Allah appeals to the mind as much as to the heart. He tells us to think, to reflect, to analyze, to observe the universe, to question our assumptions, and to recognize the signs within ourselves and the world around us. This means that Islam views knowledge as foundational to faith, and that has not changed with time. What has changed, however, is the landscape in which we seek that knowledge. Today, people are exposed to endless streams of ideas, philosophical trends, social theories, political frameworks, scientific assumptions, and psychological concepts, all blended together with personal opinions and emotional storytelling. Without a grounded foundation in Islamic knowledge, a person may find themselves overwhelmed, confused, or influenced without realizing it. Even worse, they may begin interpreting Islam through the lens of modern narratives instead of interpreting modern narratives through the lens of Islam. This is why grounding a man through knowledge is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Knowledge gives your heart the language to understand what it already feels. It gives your mind the clarity to distinguish truth from distortion. It gives your soul the ability to stay rooted while the world sways from trend to trend. And this grounding begins with the Qur'an, not just reading it, but studying it, reflecting on it, internalizing its message. The Qur'an is not meant to be a background sound or a ritual recitation. It is meant to shape your world. You refine your reasoning and awaken your soul. When you study the Qur'an with depth, you begin to see the world differently. You realize that nothing is random. You recognize the patterns of human behavior. You understand the nature of trials. You become familiar with the psychological tricks of SHOY letter 1E6 Macron N. You see through the illusions of the Dunya. And most importantly, You begin to appreciate the mercy and wisdom of Allah in ways that transform your entire approach to life. But Quranic knowledge alone is not enough without understanding the life of the Prophet, letter F, DFA. His biography is not a collection of stories, it is a training manual for the believer's heart. It teaches resilience, patience, emotional intelligence, leadership, compassion, and spiritual courage. It shows you how faith looks when lived, not merely believed. When you study his seerah, you begin to understand why certain commandments exist. You see the context, the wisdom, the strategy, and that understanding protects you from simplistic misunderstandings of Islam. Then comes the grounding in Islamic theology, knowing who Allah is, what he has revealed about himself, and what our faith teaches about the unseen world, destiny, revelation, and purpose. Without this grounding, a person becomes vulnerable to modern ideologies that prioritize the self over the divine, feelings over truth, and opinions over revelation. Knowledge acts as the compass that keeps your Iman pointed toward Allah, even when the world pulls you in countless other directions. But knowledge also protects the heart from internal instability. Many people today struggle with Iman, not because their hearts are corrupt, but because their minds are confused. They have questions, fears, doubts, but no framework to understand them. And doubt, when left unaddressed, becomes dangerous not because the question is harmful, but because the silence around it is. Knowledge gives you the tools to engage your questions honestly, confidently, and spiritually. There is psychological depth here as well. When the mind is unanchored, the heart becomes anxious. When your world, you is inconsistent, your emotions become unstable. When you do not understand why you believe what you believe, you become dependent on emotional highs to maintain your spirituality. And when life becomes difficult, those emotional highs disappear. What remains is only what you have grounded through knowledge. People often ask, why do I feel my Iman goes up and down so fast? One answer is that emotional Iman rises quickly, but also falls quickly. But Iman grounded in knowledge rises slowly and falls slowly. It builds stability. It gives you a foundation that life cannot easily shake. And grounding yourself in knowledge also protects you from the modern culture of superficiality. Today, people want short answers, quick quotes, simplified solutions. But real growth requires depth. Real clarity requires study. Real conviction requires reflection. We cannot expect to maintain strong Iman with a diet of short clips and fragmented information. The heart needs more than inspirational sound bites. It needs sustained nourishment. So the believer must reclaim the discipline of learning. Attend classes, read with purpose. Seek scholars who combine knowledge with wisdom. Surround yourself with people who value learning. Build a relationship with Islamic knowledge that is ongoing, not occasional. Because faith is not static, it needs reinforcement. And knowledge is that reinforcement. And when you begin grounding your Iman through knowledge, something powerful happens. You stop being intimidated by ideas that challenge your faith. You stop being shaken by every new argument that appears online. You become confident, calm, and clear. You begin recognizing falsehood even when it is decorated with appealing language. You become someone who sees through the fog of modern confusion. Knowledge does not just protect your Iman, it strengthens it. It gives you conviction, it gives you depth, it gives you certainty, and certainty is one of the greatest blessings Allah can give a believer. So, in this age of distraction, confusion, and noise, grounding your Iman through knowledge is one of the most effective forms of protection. Because the heart that is supported by understanding does not crumble easily, and the mind that is illuminated by truth does not get lost in darkness. When we speak about protecting our Iman in this age of relentless distraction, one of the essential elements we must address is the environment we place ourselves in, and more specifically, people we surround ourselves with. because human beings are deeply influenced by their social world. We absorb the values, habits, priorities, and emotional energies of those we spend time with, often without even realizing it. And in a world that constantly pulls the heart toward attachment, comparison, and distraction, the people around you can either elevate your Iman or quietly drain it. The Prophet FDFA described companionship as something that shapes the inner world long before it shapes the outer behavior. He gave the example of the perfume seller versus the blacksmith. Even if you don't buy perfume, you walk away with a pleasant scent. And even if you don't participate in the soot-filled work of the blacksmith, you walk away with stains and smoke clinging to your clothes. That is the subtle psychological reality of influence. You are shaped simply by exposure. In our time, this influence is not only physical, it is digital. Your companions today include the people you follow, the content you consume, the voices you allow into your subconscious mind. And this creates a challenge that earlier generations did not face. A person might physically avoid bad company, but still spend hours consuming content that reshapes their world. You affects their desires or weakens their spiritual sensitivity. So when we talk about choosing righteous companionship, we are not only talking about friends, you must also choose your digital companions. Why does this matter so much? Because the heart is porous, it absorbs, it is affected by energies, voices, ideas, atmospheres, and emotions. If you keep placing your heart in environments where faith is mocked, where sin is normalized, where values are shallow, where God is irrelevant, where everything is about ego, status, pleasure, or attention, you cannot expect that your Iman will be unaffected. The heart cannot thrive in toxic soil. This is why the Qur'an repeatedly warns us about the influence of people on our spiritual state. On the day of judgment, those who are lost will lament, "If only I had not taken so, and so as a friend." That regret is not about a single moment, it is about the cumulative effect of people who gently, slowly, quietly pull you away from Allah. Bad companionship rarely destroys you instantly. It erodes you, it numbs you. It makes you comfortable with mediocrity. It makes you dismissive of your own conscience, and that erosion is far more dangerous because it's nearly invisible. Now, one of the greatest challenges today is that many people underestimate their vulnerability to influence. They assume, I am strong, I know who I am, I can handle this. But no one is immune to influence. Even the companions of the Prophet FDFA were instructed to choose righteous friends. Even the scholars of the past spoke about the dangers of environment. If the strongest generations needed protection, what about us? Living in a world engineered to distract the heart and weaken the soul. And so, choosing righteous companionship is not about being picky, it's about being spiritually intelligent. Look at the people around you. Do they remind you of Allah or distract you from Him? Do they push you toward growth or pull you toward stagnation? Do they elevate your standards or lower them? Do you leave their presence with a clean heart or a heavy one? The reality is that we all need people who nourish our inner world. Faith thrives in community. Even the early Muslims did not grow alone. They grew together. The Prophet FDFA built a society, not just individuals. He emphasized brotherhood and sisterhood because isolation weakens the heart and righteous companionship strengthens it. But righteous companionship is not only about having religious friends. It is about choosing people who embody sincerity, humility, integrity, gratitude, patience, people whose presence makes you want to be a better human being. People who normalize goodness, who value reflection, who respect boundaries, who hold you accountable with gentleness, and who protect your privacy and dignity. There is a psychological dimension here as well. When you are surrounded by people who share your values, the path of righteousness feels natural. You don't feel odd for wanting to pray. You don't feel strange for avoiding certain sins. You don't feel embarrassed for wanting to grow spiritually. But when you are surrounded by people whose priorities conflict with yours, righteousness feels heavy. You constantly feel like you're swimming upstream, battling the current of peer expectations. Many people today are spiritually exhausted, not because their Iman is weak, but because their environment is draining. They are fighting battles alone, internally resisting habits normalized by those around them. They feel out of place, misunderstood, or spiritually isolated. And no heart can survive long in isolation. Allah created hearts to grow through connection with Him, and connection with people who lead you to Him. Choosing righteous companionship also means being intentional about who you allow to influence you online. If your feed is filled with superficiality, materialism, cynicism, or mindless content, then your heart will naturally reflect those patterns. But if your digital space includes scholars, reminders, beneficial reflections, spiritually grounded individuals, your inner world will begin absorbing that light. Your heart will become more aware, more stable, more alive. But this choice requires courage. Sometimes it means distancing yourself from people you care about, because the relationship is spiritually harmful. Sometimes it means stepping away from environments where you feel pressured to compromise your values. Sometimes it means being alone for a while until you find righteous company. This is not easy, but Iman is worth protecting, even when it costs something. And here's the deeper spiritual truth. When you take one step away from harmful environments for the sake of Allah, He replaces what you lost with something far better. He brings people into your life who strengthen you. He brings opportunities that uplift you. He brings moments that reshape you. No one sacrifices for Allah, except that Allah fills the void with something richer, more nourishing, and more aligned with your soul. Surrounding yourself with righteous companionship is not merely about avoiding harm. It's about cultivating a spiritual ecosystem in which your Iman can flourish. You cannot grow in soil that suffocates your roots. But place your heart among people who remind you of Allah, and you will notice how your thoughts deepen, your emotions soften, your worship strengthens, and your inner compass becomes clearer. Your environment matters, your companions matter, your influences matter, and ultimately, the people around you can either be the wind beneath your wings or the chains around your ankles. Choose carefully, choose intentionally, choose spiritually. When we speak about protecting our Iman in an age of distractions, there comes a point where you must confront the reality that no matter how much knowledge you gain, no matter how many lectures you listen to, no matter how many advices you internalize, nothing changes unless you take consistent action. And this is where many people struggle, not because they don't know what to do, but because the modern world is engineered to make consistency feel impossible. We live in an era where everything is instantaneous, instant communication, instant entertainment, instant gratification, and because of that, we expect spiritual growth to also be instant. But Iman doesn't operate that way. Iman grows through repetition, effort, discipline, and the quiet, unseen moments when you choose Allah over your distractions. And that choice, repeated over months and years, is what transforms you. You have to understand that Iman is a living entity. It rises and falls, it weakens and strengthens. The Prophet They described it almost like clothes that wear out. So, if Iman can wear out, then the only way to renew it is through continuous effort. The biggest mistake people make is waiting for motivation, waiting for the perfect mood, the perfect environment, the perfect emotional high. But consistency is built not on motivation, but on commitment. If you only act when you feel inspired, your Iman will always be fragile. But when you act even when you don't feel like it, when you pray even when you're tired, when you limit distractions even when your nafs craves them, when you choose silence over noise even though noise is easier, that's when Iman becomes anchored. That's when your inner world begins to shift. There's also a psychological element here that is worth reflecting on. The human mind is shaped by habits far more than by feelings. This is why the Qur'an and Sunnah emphasize daily actions. Not occasional bursts of spirituality, but consistent acts, even small ones, that keep the heart connected to Allah. The Prophet didn't say the best deeds are the biggest. He said the best deeds are those done regularly, even if they are small. Think about that for a moment. A small deed, repeated consistently, has more impact on your Iman than a massive deed done occasionally. And that wisdom alone is enough to transform your spiritual life. It also means you have to redefine progress. For many people, progress looks dramatic. They expect themselves to suddenly wake up early every day, pray long nawafil, read half the Quran every week, give charity regularly, and abandon every distraction instantly. But that's not how human psychology works. Real progress is subtle, it's incremental. It's built one decision at a time. It's built by establishing one habit at a time instead of overwhelming yourself with unrealistic expectations. When you try to change everything at once, you fail. But when you change one thing at a time, you build a foundation that lasts. And part of that consistency is learning how to protect your environment. You cannot expect your Iman to remain strong if your surroundings constantly pull you in the opposite direction. There is a reason why the righteous before us emphasized the importance of choosing your companions, choosing your spaces, choosing what you expose your heart to. In our age, environment isn't just physical, it's digital. Your phone is part of your environment. Your social media feeds are part of your environment. The people you follow, the voices you listen to, the content you consume, all of this shapes your Iman. If every day you feed your soul with distractions, temptations, and noise, then you cannot expect your heart to remain pure or focused. So, consistency begins with controlling what enters your mind and heart. It begins with curating your environment so that it becomes easier to obey Allah and harder to fall into heedlessness. And you also have to recognize that consistency, spiritually, is not a straight line. You will have good days and bad days, days of strength and days of weakness, and that's natural. The danger is not in falling. The danger is in thinking that falling means you should give up. Shaitan's biggest victory is not your mistake. It's your hopelessness after the mistake. So when you slip, and you will, your job is not to dwell on the slip. Your job is to return, to restart, to resume. That ability to restart again and again is one of the most powerful tools for protecting your Iman in an age of distractions. Another aspect is intentionality. Many people think consistency means doing more, but in reality, consistency often begins with doing less, but doing it with presence, sincerity, and focus. Reading one page of Quran with understanding is better than reading 20 pages without attention. Praying 2 rakat of nafil with humility is better than rushing through 8. Consistency is not about impressive quantity, but about creating stable points in your day where your heart reconnects with Allah. When those anchor points exist, your day changes, and over time, your life changes. There is also something important about building routines that dignify your soul. The soul thrives on stability. The heart flourishes in rhythm. When you create even a minimal daily routine of remembrance, reflection, or worship, you are giving your soul a structure in a world that constantly dissolves structure. You are building a spiritual immune system, and that system protects you even on days when you're tired, overwhelmed, or not at your best. The routine becomes a safety net for your Iman. Another key dimension of consistency is accountability. Most people do better when they have someone, family, a friend, a teacher, even a community, who encourages them, checks in on them, and reminds them when they drift. In modern society, We value independence so much that we forget our religion is built on collective strength. You are more likely to remain consistent when you surround yourself with people who are also striving. Their energy becomes yours. Their discipline rubs off on you. Their focus pulls you forward. And when you feel like slipping, they remind you of what matters. This is why companionship is emphasized so strongly in our tradition, not just socially, but spiritually. We should also acknowledge that consistency is often about choosing long-term benefit over short-term comfort. Distractions offer immediate pleasure. Worship offers long-term peace. Distractions give instant stimulation. Worship gives lasting nourishment. Distractions entertain the senses. Worship elevates the soul. So, consistency requires a level of maturity, an ability to delay gratification, to choose meaning over comfort, to think beyond the present moment. And the more you practice this, the stronger your Iman becomes. At the end of the day, what allows a believer to stay consistent is knowing that Allah sees every effort, no matter how small. That Allah knows when you struggled to pray Fajr but still got up. That Allah knows when you resisted opening that app that wastes your time. That Allah knows when you lowered your gaze, controlled your tongue, or walked away from something harmful. These small victories may not impress the world, but they are massive in the sight of Allah. And when you remind yourself of that, consistency becomes easier. Because now you're not doing it for people. You're doing it for the one who never forgets, never overlooks, never fails to reward. So when we talk about protecting your Iman, understand that consistency isn't a luxury. It isn't an optional element of spirituality. It is the very mechanism through which Iman is preserved, strengthened, and stabilized. Without consistency, Iman becomes fragile. With consistency, Iman becomes unshakable. And the truth is, every one of us already knows what we need to do. We don't need new information. We need discipline. We need sincerity. We need structure. And we need to decide, once and for all, that our Iman is too precious to leave it at the mercy of distractions. The final thought I want to leave you with is simple. Your Iman will grow in the direction of your daily choices. Not your wishes, not your intentions, not your emotions, your choices. So guard those choices, because in the end, the person you become is simply the sum of what you choose over and over again. Choose Allah consistently, and everything else will fall into its proper place.